ISS, founded in 1952, was one of the first institutions to offer a major in development studies. Unlike some institutions, ISS instruction is not prescriptive. You are challenged to think critically and explore different approaches within the realm of development. Often, the answer to your question is another question. A key component in building this critical thinking lens is the course The Making of Development, required for all students during Term 1. This course is an introduction to theories and strategies of international development, looking at the making, unmaking, and remaking of development. One of the most unique characteristics of the ISS is the diversity of the student body. We are 8 students from Ghana, Indonesia, Uganda, Colombia, the US, Ecuador, and India. Here are our stories of personal growth and the transformation of our perspectives before and after the course. We invite you on our journey of unmasking development. On paper, I thought the argument for economic development was strong. Because of its dominance as an approach, it was really the only theory I had learned about. If we can increase the GDP for a particular country and its citizens, then theoretically we can increase their standard of living. More income means an increased ability to afford basic necessities like food, healthcare, etc. More income means less poverty. After the making of development, I am not convinced growth of GDP is actually translating to higher standards of living. What if we see growth but it is unevenly distributed within a society, as is the example in the US, with income inequality increasing since the 1970s? GDP has grown, but these changes haven't reached those most affected by poverty. How is the wealth distributed to different categories of people? Women, minorities, and indigenous? How has this massive growth affected our environment as we see unprecedented levels of greenhouse gases, destruction of the rainforest, and an ever-changing climate? It's time we stop looking at economic development as a panacea.
I understood gender as opposed to sex as the social classification into masculine and feminine. This includes roles, attitudes, behaviors, and values. Also, there is jobs that are appropriate for women and men. Well, it turns out that gender refers to relations between men and women, not just women. Through history, there have been economic, political, and social inequalities based on gender. And what about our gender identities? Do we live in a world that has been ruled by heteronormative constructions? Do NGOs and other organizations that were in development play into and contribute to this narrative? How does heteronormativity affect how I define myself or the expectations I have for my life? And wait, another important question here is, has the concept of gender always existed? For some civilizations, these concepts show up only after colonialism and has complicated the entire social structure.
Preconception about human rights was generalized and limited. Human rights was embedded within human beings since they were born as the citizen of a state. Through state legislation, everyone was given freedom to sustain their living, including freedom of expression. At glance, it was visualized by people participating in rallies and agitations, where they gathered in front of the government office to protest for certain agenda to be fulfilled in favor of humanity, equality, justice, and dignity. The fact that state acknowledged people's rights was conceived based on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For us, the universalization of human rights is for the benefit of all.
However, when we started to unpack the concept, it seems unlikely to reach the equal rights for all. Some important measures need to be considered to derive the particular rights such as intersectionality, stratification, and so. For instance, the right to freedom of expression from a global perspective. Particularly the US took this right seriously, although it did make numerous exceptions of fraud and defamation. In other hand, in Europe, most governments believe that the right to freedom of expression does not extend to hate speech. At the same time, in many Islamic countries, any kind of defamation of Islam is not protected by freedom of speech. Human rights law blindly acknowledges that the right to freedom of expression may be limited by consideration of public order and morals. However, the government tries to comply with the international human right to freedom of expression is given no specific guidance.
My thoughts about sustainability were limited to concepts such as recycling and green technologies. Practicing sustainability meant adopting green technologies like solar energy, wind energy, and electric cars, and decreasing our dependency on fossil fuels.
Nowadays, you see the word sustainability being used everywhere. But has it just become another buzzword with no real implications? I now realize that developing green technology requires a large amount of resources and traditional energy. It has also been shown that if we use technology to make something more efficient, for example, a refrigerator, that there is no net energy saved because in many cases, we increase our overall consumption. Has the word sustainability been hijacked by capitalism in order to avoid decreases in the mass consumption that underpins so many of our societies? It seems like the only thing that will contribute to true sustainability will be a change in how we consume and not the adoption of so-called green practices or technologies.
What do you think about growth? Have you ever heard the term degrowth?
Before I joined this course, I thought growth was what I needed to be able to get all I wanted and to live a happy life. For me, happiness meant more money to spend and provide for myself. I hadn't heard about degrowth before.
Well, what about now? What do you think about degrowth?
Well, during the course, I was struck by the ugly truth. I didn't realize that development has done substantial damage both ecologically and socially, and that having more money doesn't automatically lead to better well being. Then I was introduced to the concept of degrowth. A simple definition of degrowth is to reduce production altogether with consumption to the point of sufficiency. Degrowth promotes economies with smaller metabolisms but with a different structure and new functions.
We need to understand that degrowth is not related only with economic terms or with GDP. It is possible if we think about it as a multidimensional concept. You can grow in a different way, for example, creating social enterprises that abandon the corporate structure as a form of productive organization. But I agree with you. Is it possible? Are countries in the global north ready and willing to abandon mass consumption? We hope you've enjoyed listening to our personal stories and changing perspectives. We hope to see you soon at the ISS, where you too will have the opportunity to unmask development and challenge the hegemonic theories and concepts that have traditionally dominated the development narrative.